Before we begin, I just want to take a moment to congratulate, on behalf of all of us who are participating, to congratulate the City of San Antonio, the sponsors of the summit, Genetics Policy Institute, Alan Fernandez and Bernie, for a wonderful 10th World Stem Cell Summit. So congratulations to those guys. We're actually waiting for one more person to join us, but in the interest of time, we should keep going. My name is Alan Jakimo, and I am on the board of legal advisors to GPI. I've been working with Bernie and Alan for a number of years. There's Beth, who's joining us. And what I thought we would do very briefly at the outset is just introduce each of the panelists. Hi, Beth, right there, your mic. I thought, and the steps are over there. You don't want to go that direction. Okay, all right, okay. So perfect timing. What we'll do is first very quickly introduce who we are and where we came from, and then we can launch into things.
Timo. You want me to start?
Yeah, just who you are and where you came from.
Thank you, Alan. Welcome, everybody. My name is Timo Faltus. I'm from Germany, from the Translational Center for Regenerative Medicine in the city of Leipzig, close to Berlin. I'm also with the University of Halle-Wittenberg, close to Berlin as well, where I lecture law. And I was invited to present you on this panel the European view on what you're discussing on.
Hello, I'm Kirstin Matthews. I'm your Texan. I'm actually from Houston, San Antonio, but right now I'm in Houston at Rice University at the Baker Institute for Public Policy.
Thank you. Jeanne.
Yes. I'm the token stem cell scientist on this board. I do a lot of genomics and epigenetic analysis, and also in developing clinical therapy for Parkinson's disease.
Hi. I'm Beth Roxland. I am the Bioethics and Strategy Leader for Johnson & Johnson. This is a new position that we just started back in January. Being the recovering litigator that I am, I have to say that nothing I'm saying here represents the company or the company's position on anything. But prior to joining J&J, I was the Executive Director of the New York State Task Force on Life and the Law, which is New York State's Bioethics Commission, as well as the Special Advisor to the Commissioner of Health on Stem Cell Research Ethics. And so I've come very much from the background of stem cell research ethics.
Thank you. I should emphasize that everything that we're saying here represents our personal views, just to underscore what Beth just said. It represents our personal views and shouldn't be attributed to our employers. We're going to deal with what I think are actually two very ancient problems in the evolution of our species. One dates back about 2,500 years, I think, and the other is probably older than that. So the one that dates back 2,500 years was it may have been the first tweet in medicine. It was about 10 characters, 3 words. Any volunteers? 2,500 years ago. Do no harm.
I am so not classically trained.
Exactly.
That was a total guess. You didn't feed me that line in advance.
Yeah, exactly. Do no harm, Hippocrates. The other ancient principle that we're going to be looking at is probably even older than that, and may have been what accounted for Homo sapiens doing better than Neanderthal. And it was the idea that in order to have health, we need new molecular entities, and we need NMEs, we need new drugs, we need new medicines, and we've got to disseminate those. Those have to be applied, and that concept is probably older than do no harm. In fact, I was thinking this morning about do no harm, where it came from, and I could just start imagining what the medical practices must have been like for Hippocrates to say, hey, do no harm. So basically we have an accelerator, which is new molecular entities, new drugs, new biologics, new cell-based therapies. That's the accelerator. And we have a brake, do no harm. Don't do anything unless you know it's safe and effective. And just like driving a car with an accelerator and a brake, you need an optimal mix. And what we're here to talk about today is whether we have that kind of optimal mix and what is happening as a matter of policy making and ethics to achieve that optimal mix. And at last spring's ISSCR meeting in Vancouver, one of the presenters, Professor Turner, suggested that from a safety standpoint, the scientific community needs to begin to communicate a letter writing campaign to the FDA about this subject. And Kirstin was there, and I'm going to ask her to tell us more about that session and the reaction and perceptions of where it might be going. And of course, Jeanne is in that scientific community that Professor Turner was talking about. So.
Well, I think to start with, I don't know if everyone is familiar with what Lee Turner's been doing for a while, but also ISSCR, which is looking at what's going on with a lot of these experimental and unproven treatments that are being marketed in clinics, and some of them are in the US, and some of them have been shut down, and there's other places in the world have also put them up, and some have been shut down, and a lot of them are still going. He was really concerned, as you said, with the safety and the risk that was associated with this. He was trying to advocate that this is one of the things that FDA's job is to do the regulation, to make sure that these clinics aren't overreaching, and I think the scientists have always been very supportive of it. I think, I'm trying to remember what year it was when Irv Weissman was the president of the ISSCR, started with pushing, with having help, a website to help understanding. They did a little bit of effort into trying to identify clinics, but that kind of backfired when they got threatened with lawsuits. Because they, I guess, were a really regulatory authority and didn't want to really take that particular thing on. It's just a scientist organization, and that's really what their mandate is. So Lee's actually trying to advocate for the scientists in the general community is to get more involved so that this practice doesn't actually taint the rest of the research process.
I wanted to add something that it just recently became apparent to me, and actually it was through Lee that I learned, that you're probably all familiar with the website clinicaltrials.gov. It's got the .gov. Okay, so I found out something about clinicaltrials.gov which I did not know, and that is that any entity, any institution or group that has an IRB approval, which is not a really high bar, can get their clinical trial posted on clinicaltrials.gov. Clinicaltrials.gov is reliant on the poster to be honest, which I didn't know. I thought if it was .gov, they must have some oversight, but it turns out they do not have oversight. So there was an example recently of a company in my area. It came to my attention because it was, I found out about it through some of our Parkinson's disease advocates, that there was a clinicaltrial.gov posted trial using mesenchymal stem cells to treat Parkinson's disease. And it was an observational trial, and they were going to charge the patients $10,000 to get an injection of their own cells derived from from adipose tissue. But so to me, that's not a clinical trial. That's just a pay per serve kind of thing. But it turns out clinicaltrials.gov does not discriminate. And because of the listing on clinicaltrials.gov, the Parkinson's associations all picked up on that because they do searches routinely. And that's how the patients found out, and that's how that particular company was marketing their service.
You pause there.
Get your arms around the fact that a .gov is meaningless in this case. It's essentially just a website where you can post stuff. You could do a clinical trial.
I'm writing one out right now.
We could post it this afternoon.
Beth, you were on the ethics committee at ISSCR for a while. Any thoughts about how Professor Turner's letter writing campaign fits into that?
I mean, yes and no. I guess a body such as ISSCR can only do so much. I think it was an attempt to build awareness. They have tried to write guidelines. They obviously attempted to publicly post a lot of these for lack of a better word, sham clinics and sham trials. And Professor Turner's presentation was actually almost mind-boggling in the number of clinics that were operating in large cities in the U.S. I mean, it's sort of, at least personally, I've gotten used to the notion that some of these things might occur outside of the U.S. where oversight is not as strict, but the number of clinics in the U.S. offering absolutely unproven therapies that were very high priced was truly mind-boggling. Now, how that fits in with ISSCR, I don't know. I think as a lot of different areas of medicine and research, there's an open question as to who should be doing the policing, particularly where it's a global issue, and or even if, and this is not my area of expertise, whether it's the FDA or a different entity within even the U.S. government that, maybe the FDA in conjunction with the FTC because it's false advertising or something like that. But, how much ISSCR as a voluntary professional organization can do is, I don't know the answer to that.
So from the standpoint of scientists being asked to do this, as a scientist, what's your reaction to this kind of request to the science community?
I think he went about it a bit wrong because even the letters of recommendation I write for people have to be written by the people I'm recommending. We don't have time to do that sort of thing. I would have signed on to a general letter, though. I would have signed on to a petition. But a letter writing campaign is just not realistic for those of us who have less than zero time.
Timo, would this ever happen in Europe?
Europe is more or the European Union, and maybe especially Germany, is more famous for campaigning against something, especially when it comes to stem cell research, especially when it comes to human embryonic stem cell research. We had several campaigns against human embryonic stem cell research, but when it comes to bringing stem cell-based therapies to the clinic, my impression is that the European regulators, on the one hand the European Medicine Agency, and the German regulators come to the scientists and help them in advance to get the product to the clinic. They are very, very helpful in Germany and the European Union.
And the underlying tension here, and we'll switch gears a little bit to a second topic, the underlying tension is that break in the accelerator. Do no harm on one hand, and on the other hand, if those of you who may have been in Pasadena 2 or 3 years ago heard Andy Grove make a presentation to speed up the ability of patients to try drugs that have not yet been approved. And what Andy Grove was suggesting was sort of a bifurcation, that once you have phase 2 safety demonstrated and some modicum of efficacy, even though it's not a pivotal trial upon which FDA could grant an NDA or BLA, to at least allow patients and their physicians to try those new products that have not yet been approved. And I know because I was there was a lot of skepticism among the representatives of the medical community that was workable. I'm sure that there would be problems in terms of the impact of that on the conduct of phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials in terms of biostatistics and whatnot. Nonetheless, what has been happening is that various patient advocacy groups in different states have gone in the opposite direction from Professor Turner, and they're saying not to have letter writing campaigns to the FDA to watch out for safety problems, but these right to treatment groups are seeking laws in the various states that give them the right to these treatments before they are approved in the regular way. Beth, I think you've done a lot of research in this area recently, and you're in a much better position to take over there.
Yes, so first of all, by a show of hands, how many of you have heard about the right to try legislation? A number of you. So I've actually been looking at this largely, not through my work at J&J, but through Art Kaplan has put together at NYU a compassionate use working group. Right to try often, or most often, comes up mostly in the pharmaceutical context. But if you look at the bills, most of the bills cover biologics and devices as well. The first state to have passed this right to try law was Colorado. It was passed in around May. It sort of perked everybody's ears up. What is this right to try, and what is the state doing, sort of acting in this space? What's become obvious over the last number of months, now that we have 5 states that have passed it: Colorado, Louisiana, Missouri, Michigan, and Arizona. Arizona having passed it by ballot initiative just the other week. Wyoming introducing the bill today, is that this is actually a coordinated effort at legislation funded by the Goldwater Institute. I guess it could be characterized as a libertarian institute. They've put up model legislation, and most of the states that have adopted it or who are proposing bills are very much almost lifting the exact language from the model legislation proposed by Goldwater. Now, the intent as put forth by Goldwater is that, and it's all over the bills themselves, is that as a terminal patient, you have the right to save your life. And you have the right to access experimental therapies. They advocate access after phase 1. It, however, says you have this right to save your life by accessing experimental therapies, but companies, sponsors, insurers, government, no mandate on their end. You may make your experimental therapy available upon the request of the person asking for it. And as my very astute colleague Nancy Dubler said, you don't have a right, a true right, unless others are obligated to recognize your right. So arguably, these laws are misleading to the public in making the state citizens think they have a right that they don't actually have the ability to enforce. And you know, I can go on at length, but the underlying, I think there's a sort of there's a number of underlying themes that go along with why the states are passing this and why it's catching so much traction, particularly in the pharmaceutical area. It takes many, many years between proof of efficacy and knowledge that this could be a very promising drugs and actual broad approval to the market. This is an attempt to basically bypass the FDA. States do not, in my humble legal opinion, it would be preempted if that was actually enforceable. There's some legal scholarly debate about it. It's a bit unsettled, but it's an attempt to speed up the process to get at the medications and the therapies faster. But it's not necessarily an effective way, and in fact, it's no way at all, except to provide false hopes, or as Art Kaplan termed it, it's the right to beg law. And it is, in my opinion, somewhat unfortunate because there's a lot of thought and there's a lot of effort going into moving this type of legislation along that is ineffective, rather than looking at the root causes of the issue and how to actually ameliorate what is the desperate unmet needs and how we might fix the system, as opposed to building this bureaucracy on top of, sort of more of a, what might be a speedier system. Or, and the FDA is now doing quite a bit in terms of trying to speed up the process. And this is in no way to blame the FDA versus all of the other moving parts, and there are many, many moving stakeholders here. But for advocates, to those who are looking at the right to try laws, I would suggest you look hard at what is actually being proposed. It is on its face not what it appears to be.
So with that said, how does that relate to existing concepts like compassionate use and expanded access? How does How do they relate?
Well, I think to play off of what she was saying is what I've noticed over the past year of kind of studying all these issues is that compared to, I think we've talked about this the other day, 10 years ago, I see Judy and Becky here, we had strong advocates in stem cells, which were, I think, the reason why California has the CIRM, the Institute for Regenerative Medicine, and some of the reasons why Bush was, when he left office and Obama came in, there was a quick change in the federal guidelines in the US. But now it seems after such a long time, people are impatient for what they were promised for in 2004, which were cures, largely, when the hype for California was propagated. And because of that, it seems like now there's almost a fight between the scientists and the advocates indirectly for what they want, instead of working together and working these three parties, I would say, the regulators, the FDA, working with the scientists, working with the patients to find what are some of the better options. For instance, I think Japan's trying a new model of how they want to view it by having ways to use cell therapies just a little bit earlier. I think, I'm not 100% familiar with it, but somewhere around phase 2 where they could potentially jump in. Are there ways, maybe we can watch and see how that experiment's going and seeing if there's something that's what we want to do with our FDA and how to get everyone together. I kind of agree with the analysis from Beth, which is this, we're not at the point to use expanded access that the FDA has, and the right to try laws are interesting, but they're not necessarily empowering you as much as you want. So there has to be some other ways, I think, that we can all work more effectively together.
And I just wanted to pick up on your point, which I attempted to say, but not nearly as artfully as you did, is that whether you're looking at it as expanded access, which is, I see it much more in pharmaceutical context, expanded access than stem cell, but whatever we are all trying to do to get things to market or to patients faster requires multiple stakeholders, requires the regulators, the sponsors, the researchers, the advocates. I would think that advocates would not, or patients would not want unsafe therapies. They don't want to be paying for things. They don't want hopes on things that don't work. And so there's certainly a place, and there's still certainly a need for trials and proof of safety and efficacy. But whether we're dealing with how fast or how speedy we get things to market, it's an intractable problem from most ends. And in my mind, any true solution requires having all the stakeholders at the table thinking through these things in a coherent way, rather than frustration, let's say, being vented, and some understandable frustration by state legislatures by passing a law that is really just a legislature by deal, you know.
So I wanted to, since I am funded by CIRM and I live in California, I just wanted to clarify that from my viewpoint, CIRM has actually encouraged communication between scientists and patient advocates, and has enabled, given a voice to patient advocates, that there are the oversight board that decides, votes on the grants. Essentially, the patient advocates are the only ones who vote up or down, because they're the only ones who aren't conflicted. So on the 29-member oversight board, there are usually 6 people who are eligible to vote on a particular cell line, or a particular grant. And sometimes these grants will be huge, $20 or $40 million. The only people who can vote are the patient advocates, which puts them in a very difficult position since they're the ones who are not scientists. So it's not perfect. They may be empowered beyond their abilities, but they're definitely empowered.
That's true, but we're seeing the migration of people to finding, and that's, I wasn't trying to say there's anything wrong with how CIRM was run. I was just saying in general,
there are a lot of things that are wrong,
across the country, there
one.
was this, and it started with a lot of the actors we saw in California, but it was everywhere. I mean, we had laws being passed in New York. I don't know. I think Maryland had some stem cell stuff going on. Illinois, there was places. There was conversations all over in. Some of them were, Texas was a little bit more restrictive, but there were still a lot of conversations, and I still feel, having talked to, I mean, we're in Texas, this is close to where Cell-Tex was, which was closed down, which is one of the clinics. When the FDA looked at it, the people, this is what they said was there, but then when they actually looked at what product was there, it wasn't. It was a bunch of dead cells, the counts was wrong, what they were actually giving the person wasn't necessarily what they said they were giving them, so I feel like that's what FDA is supposed to be doing, is watching after the safety and making sure we're doing what best we can. And having talked to a lot of the patients that go through the process, though, over the past couple of years since it's closed down, I feel like they're telling me that they are just really disappointed. They just really wanted to do something. They wanted to try something, which I think brought on some of the right to try laws. And I feel like that's not necessarily the direction we want to go. What we need to do is we're going to try something new together. We need to find a way where all of the stakeholders agree with the scientists, with the regulators, are willing to actually try it together than just work off of somebody who's on a profit-driven model and has no need to give any experimental data or show any outcomes or efficacy of what he's giving his patients.
So I think there is a very significant point that you're making, and it's this. If you go back to the World Stem Cell Summit 7 years ago and I may have the dates and the places a little off, but it's close. If you go back to the World Stem Cell Summit in Wisconsin, or the World Stem Cell Summit in Massachusetts, or Baltimore, which was about 6-7 years ago. Detroit was a turning point, I think. But you go back to those stem cell summits, and it was all about, and this is, I think, the point that you made here, is that those summits were all about scientists and patient advocates working together, not so much on regenerative medicine at the time, but more on the right to do stem cell research. And at that point, there was an alignment of interests. And I think the point that you're making is now that and Detroit, I think, was one of the first summits where we were really hearing about clinics being started. I remember the announcement of Wayne State University at that summit. What we're now seeing is a divergence of interests, that there's at least some subset of patient advocates who are in the states that Beth mentioned, who are going out and pursuing this right to treatment, and this is what prompted Professor Turner to some extent also, there's now a misalignment of interests, and how do we bring patient advocacy and science back to the way they were working when research was the issue? Is that a crazy statement?
So just to be contrary, because I enjoy being contrary,
that's the litigator in you.
Exactly. I don't necessarily think that there's such a misalignment, or at least it would be unfair to group all patient advocates as having different interests than all scientists. Certainly, the one thing I will say on behalf of my own company is I don't think that that's the case at all. And in fact, I think, and I due respect to many of the large companies, very much engage with patient advocates and disease advocates, and very much want to help bring cures and treatments to patients. I think what you do see, though, is a much broader shift that goes way beyond research and is more of a shift between people making decisions that could be characterized as paternalistic on behalf of your doctor will decide for you what treatment will be best for you. Even the way you hear advertisements now for just about anything, it says, go to your doctor and you and your doctor will make this decision. You see a broad shift towards autonomy, period, and not decision-making on behalf of. But I don't necessarily think that there is a lack of alignment between researchers with integrity and patient advocates.
Well, that's different.
But that's it, and that's why I wanted. There are researchers and clinicians with a lot of integrity, and I don't think they are out of alignment with patient advocates. I think perhaps making sure that those groups do act in tandem with the others that could help speed therapies to market in an appropriate way is the most effective way to go, while also filtering out those that are, let's say return or the very for-profit, lack of slightly less integrity type folks.
So can I comment?
Yeah.
One of the things that I mean, it's just I'm in favor of a lot of these things, but the trouble is that when I actually talk to patients, it's very hard to discourage them from going to a clinic that I know will not help them and spending the money and raising money. I mean, it's heartbreaking when people like have bake sales to raise the money to go to some clinic that will do no good to them. And I think that this right to try law may have, in states, may have the effect of encouraging these clinics. I mean, there are doctors, there are clinicians who have a weekend class in how to do mesenchymal stem cell therapy. And then they go back and they say, well, I think I'll try, I'm going to focus on autism, and I'm going to do mesenchymal stem cell therapy for autism. I actually know somebody who's done that. Of course, it's not going to work at all. But with right to try, it's sort of like the analogy that sometimes I use is not all that effective. It's like that taking aspirin is relatively safe, but taking aspirin for your cancer, you could go ahead and take it, but it's not going to do a thing for your cancer. So is a $10,000 therapy that won't do anything, or treatment that won't do anything for you, somehow immoral? What's the downside of that? What's the bad side of that? What does it do? I mean, this is a rhetorical question, but you can answer it. So that's going to happen. And I've already seen, even with in California, that has relatively rigorous oversight of such things, and they just proliferate like crazy because they're so profitable.
So, having said that, and I want to turn to Timo in a second to get the European perspective on this, but if what you said just now is true, is that there really isn't that kind of division, then what and patient advocates should be concerned just as much as Professor Turner is about the safety and take into consideration what Jeanne just said, then it seems to me that patient advocacy needs to focus on these right to treatment laws and participate in the process to keep them from resulting in the kind of situation that Jeanne is articulating. Is that the right direction?
I'm smiling because I can't really take a position on that. But I think that could be the arguable conclusion, that my understanding is that as soon as this passed in Colorado, actually a bunch of stem cell clinics popped up in Colorado because of the right to try law. It is having, again, my understanding is it's having a collateral effect much worse in the stem cell area than it is, let's say, in pharmaceuticals that are known to be very, very heavily regulated. It's allowing these for-profit sham procedures, clinics, what have you, pop up in these states. And whether we're looking at it as patient advocates or just the public, I would think it is not in the public interest, period.
So, go ahead.
If you want to take a sort of ironic note on that, if there are 1,000 clinics in Colorado, they will certainly drive the price down for the worthless treatment.
So I think this conversation leaves us with an important take-home message and something for the GPIs of the world to focus on, and that's the role of patient advocacy in dealing with these laws that may be headed in a direction that takes us where we don't want to go. Having said that, you're listening to us U.S.-centric folks talking about this, and where do we stand with respect to Europe?
Well, to summarize what I've been hearing so far, I guess most of you are from the U.S. This is like listening to something from outer space for me. Yeah.
That's what I thought you said.
But this is also one of the reasons for me coming to the US to get this information, because when you ever attend like a stem cells conference or regenerative medicine conference in Germany or in the European Union, maybe this size of this conference, you will not find any patient advocacy. We don't have that in Europe.
You do.
But we do.
You actually do. I know some, but you don't have very many.
We do, but they have another. They go for something else than your patient advocacies do. So ours just want to make sure that the interests of the patients are kept well, maybe for politics, but they do not march to get new therapies in that way they do it here. It's just the other way around. So in Germany, it's more they march against. So when there's maybe, I say again, human embryonic stem cells, you find large petitions in the European Union against this technique.
Against them, right?
Yeah.
Can I
never
ask you,
never for
Can I ask you a very specific German question about Germany? There was a clinic called Excel, I believe.
Yes.
And it was legal under German law because it was a physician's.
Yes.
Yeah. So would you mind telling us a little bit about that? Because I saw it from a distance, and I was it really scared the hell out of me, what happened. And I'm wondering if there's anything in place.
No, the clinic.
Now, first say what happened, and then is there anything in place to prevent that from happening again?
I'm not very familiar to the Excel case. So the Excel case was a stem cell clinic, and they did nearly everything. So they offered any therapy you can imagine. And the problem then was that I think they had 2 accidents where people died. And you are right, the clinic was permissible under German and European drug law because of, maybe the word in your language would be freedom of, it's the freedom of a doctor to choose the treatment as long as he does not produce a pharmaceutical under German or European law. And this is something like you take out stem cells out of your body, you do not handle those cells to a third party and give these cells back to the same person or to another person, as long as there's no third person. This is not a drug under German law. And that was one of the reasons why they could use this exemption. Yeah? But I do not know the exact reason why they got shut down then.
Well, what I gathered from what I heard, which was definitely at least third hand, was that there were a couple of patients who, one of them died after a treatment.
Yes.
And one of them died at the clinic, I believe.
Yes.
And one of them was a child, which was especially touching. And the clinic was shut down, but I don't know. I'm just assuming that the clinic director, and I can't remember his name, he's reopened in another country in Europe.
Yes, but one possibility to shut a clinic like this down is not to use pharmaceutical law, but to use physician's law. So in Germany, a physician needs a license to practice, and when he constantly acts against the physician's code of conduct, the license, he has to give back the license, and then he's not allowed to practice.
And there was a case in California recently in which a guy named William Rader lost his medical license, which is about the worst thing you can possibly do to him. You can't he was importing cells from Ukraine and injecting them to people, treating them for whatever they felt like. And he was quite, he truly believed. He wrote a book about it. And he was getting fetal cells from aborted fetuses and injecting them into people. And then finally, one of the families of one of the people who died, not as a result of the treatment, it turned out, but as a result of driving from Alabama, I think, to San Diego. He was operating in San Diego. This guy was so ill that he was on his way to Tijuana. It's one of the reasons why San Diego is such a hotbed for these things, because the border is only like 45 minutes away. And there are hospitals in Tijuana who are happy to rent out their facilities. So, but this particular guy was actually, he was arrested, and I think it was just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, it was the worst possible punishment was dropped on him, which was he's losing his medical license. And one of the comments was actually from one of the medical examining people was, we don't think that's going to slow him down at all.
And not to keep going back to right to try, but one very interesting point that in a lot of the right to try bills, certainly in the model bill put forward by Goldwater, is an actual provision that says a physician cannot be held liable, criminally liable, and I think cannot have their license revoked by
prescribing or by attempting to procure anything under the right to try.
Yeah, so he would have been safe.
And it depended on the state, yeah.
There's another issue that we had discussed as well, and again, it's the U.S., it's the divergence between U.S. and Europe, and it has to do with the so-called fruits of the poison tree problem. In the U.S. right now, there's a therapy under study to treat macular degeneration with RPE cells that are derived from a human embryonic stem cell line. If it's safe and effective and FDA approves it, it can be prescribed and be introduced into interstate commerce. In Europe, how would that kind of product be handled in Europe today?
So first, we have clinical trials going on in the European Union using human embryonic stem cells. So we are waiting for one of those trials going to the regulators and see what happens. So, and then two things can happen.
I'm sorry, what trials?
One in London and one in France.
The RPE, the same one.
Oh, the RPE,
yeah. That's London. Yeah. So they are running, and so if they prove safety and efficiency, they will go to the regulators. So, and then they have two ways to which regulators they go. If the therapy product they produce is mass production they offer, they will have to go to the European Medicine Agency to get market approval for the entire European Union. If it's not mass production, they have the opportunity to get market approval in one of the countries of the European Union. However, I'm predicting either way, if they get it or not, there will be another European High Court case, because that's my personal view, or it's coming out of my legal foresight activities. You mentioned the fruits of the poison tree. That came out of the famous Brüssel case. So in that case, the European High Court said, well, you researcher, you want to have a patent on a technique where you need something you get only in a way we do not want, destroying embryos. And if we would give you a patent on that, we say, okay, well, we don't like it, but it's okay. So when you now come to therapies, it's the same question. If you want to use a therapy based on human embryonic stem cells, it is still necessary to destroy a human embryo. So why should that be permissible then? Because in this case, it's again the European Union or a member state of the European Union giving you the right to make money for the destruction of an embryo in the past.
So if I understand you correctly, and I may not, what could happen is that the phase 3 trials are successful, safety and efficacy are demonstrated, and then the company that has been sponsoring the trials goes to the regulator, either at the individual nation level or at the EMA level, gets an approval, and then the same kind of lawsuit that was brought against Oliver Brussel for his patent on a therapy for neurodegenerative disease derived from a human embryonic stem cell, that same moral argument will be made.
This is my prediction. And the funny thing is, or not the funny thing is, coming back to what you have been discussing all the time here, if you go back to the Brüssel case and see who was it who has taken Oliver Brüssel to court, it was an NGO, it was Greenpeace. So in the European Union, you have like NGOs and citizens of the European Union marching against and trying to get rid of human embryonic stem cell research. After the Brüssel case, I say this again and again, we had the largest citizens petition in the European Union with more than 2 million people asking the European Commission. The European Commission is the government of the European Union, to stop any kind of funding for human embryonic stem cell based research.
with nothing on the other end of the balance beam?
Yes.
So there were no patient advocates saying,
the argument
we want
was,
this.
The argument was, listen what the highest court of the European Union has told us. He told us that a human embryo, or not a human embryo, a totipotent human entity, so something which can develop into a human being, has like the moral status of a born human. You cannot destroy him to make money out of it or to get a patent on it. This is what we call against the ordre public, the public order of the European Union.
So that raises an interesting question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Beth.
If the finance was taken out of the picture, we would have the same.
You can leave out the finance aspect, and then the moment you reduce a human embryo to like an object to get out something, it's over. This is against European model.
So one of the other phenomena that have been occurring in Europe are the animal protection statutes, and the fact that companies and medical institutes have less and less ability to use animals in research, first cosmetics and then ultimately, I believe, if I'm correct, pharmaceuticals.
Yes.
And my understanding is that stem cell technology was seen as a tool to perhaps overcome some of the constraints that would be otherwise present if you could no longer use animals. What would, to the extent that I'm using embryonic stem cells, not necessarily from a human, but from an animal that we're seeking to protect with these laws, how would that play out?
Oh, Alan, you ask a question which is I cannot answer in this short time frame here, because in the European Union you always have to distinguish between what is a matter of member state law and what is a matter of European Union law. And research is member state law. So, and what an embryo is in research, this is a matter of what a single member state has to define. So when like the state X of the European Union says a human embryo is or starts at when you see first neural cells, we have to accept this. And then they can use those embryos for like embryo toxicity tests. We, in Germany, we have a problem. We are not allowed to produce human embryonic stem cells out of humans. We have to import those cells. And then we can perform the embryo toxicity test in Germany.
We could spend a lot more time on these issues, but we're getting close to the end of this session, and we should open up for Q&A from you all. If you wouldn't mind using the microphone, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lovely debate. I loved your example of that accelerator and brake. I think, but I just want to state an observation, and I want your comments on it. If we were to use the principles of evidence-based medicine that we are now, strongly promoting, none of the major inventions of medicine that we now practice would have come into place. There would be no antibiotics, there would be no liver transplant, there would be no bypass surgery. We did not do randomized trials for IVF, for test tube babies. We didn't do it for kidney transplant, we didn't do it for liver transplant, we didn't do it for brain operations, we didn't do it for trauma. Medical innovation was physician driven. Now, the problem that has happened with cell therapy is that we are using regulations designed for drugs for cell therapy. Now, a drug is a single molecule. It is manufactured at the time of trial by a single manufacturer, and it can be given in one of two ways, oral or parenteral. Cells are not a drug. They are manufactured by different people. There are different types of cells. They're used for different indications, and they're given in different ways. And in over a dozen meetings, I've asked regulators one simple question. Tell me when does something unproven become proven? And I'll tell you what, nobody has been able to answer it. There is nobody who says that, you know, stem cell therapy does not work. The argument is, it is not proven. Just because it is not proven, does it mean it does not work? And then when I ask the question, okay, and I've asked this, I've asked to people drafting ICCR regulations, I've asked to regulators, tell me when does something become proven, and I haven't got an answer.
Yeah.
So we don't have an endpoint. So I want your opinion on, are the brakes becoming stronger, so strong that the car is not moving at all?
Yeah, so my first reaction is that I think you're conflating two ideas, and you're conflating the general proposition that cells can be used for therapeutic purposes. I don't think anyone would disagree with that general proposition. However, just like no one would disagree with the idea that drugs and biologics can be used as a therapeutic as a general principle. But once you have a particular cell, once you have a particular drug or a particular biologic or a particular device, you need to pay attention, because history tells us. You know, in 1937, 100 children died because someone thought I could take the equivalent of antifreeze and mix it with a sulfur drug and give it to kids and keep them from getting sick. There was nothing in place to prevent that. In the late 1950s, early 1960s, there was a drug called thalidomide.
Yeah.
And I remember as a child looking at a Life magazine article at these horribly deformed children. And again, I come back to, in those particular cases, we need these regulations. Otherwise, you're going to have one disaster after another. That's my response.
I completely agree we need brakes. You can't drive a car without brakes. But in cell therapy, are the brakes becoming so much that the car is not moving at all? That's my point.
So I'm going to agree with part of you and disagree with part. So I agree with you in the sense that it's taken a while for the FDA to start looking at cell therapies as what they are, cell therapies and not drugs. And they're still working on it, and I still think that's something that we need to work with them on keeping them understand. But I do think that there is a place for learning efficacy. So after talking with the people from Celltex, you realize their entire model was more cells is better. Why? There was no logic behind it. There's even some data that says that that actually is not true. And then again, when we actually looked at what they were giving them, wasn't necessarily cells itself. So there is something about having this efficacy model. There is something about going through the process of it where you understand dosage. What's the proper dosage? How can we do this well? But you're right in the sense, I think, that we need to have a better conversation and keep pushing at the FDA to make sure that they're not going to try to look at this to be exactly, we can't trace it like a drug because it's not the same way. You're not doing it the same way. It's a cell, it's living, it's going to stay hopefully in your body for a lot longer than you would have something you take orally that goes and comes through your system faster. And that's, I think, what we were advocating, is trying to figure out how we can actually change.
Thank you. Next
Carrie?
question? Carrie? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent debate. And of course, my comments here are my own as well, but I've spent quite a bit of time with patients, and I spend quite a bit of time on the research side in my day job. And I wanted to introduce to the panel a question. Is there any way that we could potentially entrust those that are entrusted by the NIH, so our institutions that are conducting very responsible research, they're creating excellent protocols, and some of those have completed enrollment, and now you are just following, there hasn't been safety issues on some of these trials, perhaps there isn't the efficacy that we would have liked to have seen, but in the interim we have patients that are dying and won't make it until some of these therapies come out. Is there a role to pilot, so to speak, a different type of pathway, or maybe expand on the expedited review, compassionate use programs, and see if we should be in parallel conducting some of this research and learning what we need to learn, as Kirstin points out? Do you think there is one program that would fit, that we could start to expand on and push for?
So I think there's I mean, it's an interesting thing about compassionate use, because the most logical and sensible treatments, cell therapy treatments, are not for people who are desperately ill. Macular degeneration does not kill people. Parkinson's disease doesn't kill people. And so it makes it, I think that we have to treat that, because of that, we have to treat it differently. There's nothing there are very few situations I can think of in which stem cells would be an appropriate treatment for the terminally ill. There is one project going on in California for gliomas, in which stem cells are being used to target the cancer cells with toxic drugs. So it's a stem cell therapy in the sense that stem cells are involved, but they're actually a delivery system. So we have to keep that in mind too. And actually, now I'm going to get off on another tangent. I'll try to make it short. And that is that cell replacement therapy is only one of the possible uses for stem cells. And in fact, in many cases, it makes more sense that those cells are used to deliver something to the body, like a growth factor, or in that case, a toxic factor.
Provenge is a good example of what you're talking about, isn't it?
Provenge is a medicine for prostate cancer. And that's exactly, and it was Nobel Prize winner.
Yeah, that's right. But for the patients that have heart disease, and that's what I'm dealing with, we don't have enough hearts to transplant. So I know we have patients that pass away every day waiting for a heart. However, if they have severe heart failure and they possibly could have a cell therapy and they're willing and will consent, could there be a program for those types of patients? And can we learn from that?
So one of the reasons we know what doesn't work for heart failure is because of the desperation of, as far as I know, the preponderance of evidence is that mesenchymal stem cell therapy is not helpful for heart failure or for cardiac failure. That doesn't mean that cell treatments or cell therapy is not a good idea for heart. I think it's just that people have been looking in the wrong direction. But I agree with you, that is one situation. There are some shortcomings to that, though. Anytime you have to put the cells in a place where they might actually escape, then you have to worry about, the FDA, and rightly so, is concerned with those cells ending up in the wrong place. I mean, something as simple as causing an embolism, because the cells break free. But that you have to think about things like that. And also with heart, you need, for therapy, you need on the order of 10 to the 8th to 10 to the 9th cells, a billion cells. And that's a lot more challenging than what we believe we need for Parkinson's disease, which is 1 million, a lot less. So you can see there are lots of trade-offs here. I mean, I think I greatly admire my colleagues who are working on heart disease because I think it's extremely challenging.
With that said, unfortunately, we must end because it's 2:30 and we're on a tight schedule here. So thank you all for participating and listening to us speak, and thank you all, the panelists, for this. This was very good. Thank you.